大家好，欢迎收看udn.com 的直播。我们现在在世界新闻年会第3天的会场，也是最后一天。我们今天要谈的是科技跟媒体的发展。在我们现场的是Gary 刘，他曾经是南华早报的 CEO， 现在是Terminal 3的共同创办人，也是兼 CEO。Gary, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right. Our first begins with your time in South China Morning Post. You just left a year ago.
That's right.
You have been there for 5 years and a half. South China Morning Post is a very old newspaper. It had been more than 100 years. But all of us have noticed it become very modern these days. And they are doing a lot of digital transformation. Can you tell us what you intended to do in the South China Post and what you have accomplished over there?
Well, this is a long story. I'll keep it relatively short.
Okay.
There was a very clear and precise goal when I joined the South China Morning Post as CEO. And that was actually not so much a digital transformation. It was a news product transformation.
Oh,
we wanted to change the SCMP from a local print newspaper into a global digital media company.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to serve not just Hong Kong, but serve the entire world, especially as the story of China became ever more important. Now, of course, that means a digital transformation because we were not going to print the newspaper everywhere around the world. So the only way was through the internet. And so we went through 5+ years. I was there for nearly 6 years of significant foundational change. There are really 3 different pillars of change for the South China Morning Post during those years. The first started with data and technology. We started with data because we actually had to better understand who our users were, what they were doing on our product, what they wanted from our product, and then the technology could allow our journalists to be faster, more accurate, more effective in their journalism to the world. And so we had a massive change in the data and technology infrastructure at the SCMP. Rebuild everything. It took 5+ years. The second transformation pillar was the actual news product itself. Like I said, when I first arrived, it was very local, it was very parochial. It was in the English language, always has been.
Right.
But it was really written by Hong Kong people for Hong Kong people. Now, we had a very international newsroom. And we've been covering China for now, South China Morning Post has for 120 years. But there is a new way of thinking about coverage of China to the rest of the world. And so we had to start by understanding an audience of China watchers, of those who are globally curious around the world, understand what they cared about, the questions that they have, and then actually create journalism that served their needs. So there was a fundamental shift in the news product itself. That, of course, meant also a redesign and a rebuild of the website, the native mobile app, and then the introduction of different storytelling canvases, like a heavy investment in video. And the reason is because, as you well know, the story of a rising Asia, and especially of China, is very visual. For the rest of the world who have not been here, you can't tell the story of China without showing China.
Right.
And so that's why we invested so much in video. So the news product was fundamentally changed. And then finally, the third thing that was transformed at the Post was really the culture and the operation. A complete change in the way that the departments work together. Instead of in silos, it became truly cross-functional. And then a culture of speed as well as precision. So instead of taking 12 months to decide on change and improvement, the South China Morning Post operates now with daily data and weekly improvements as well. So all 3 of these changes, bit by bit, allowed the SCMP to become the modern news organization that it is today.
Now you have moved on, and during the last session we have, when you are moderating, you mentioned about Web 3.0 journalism. I mean, can you tell us, being a journalist myself or some of the younger generation, how they are going to adapt this kind of new changes, and how is the news organization is going to adopt according to the changes?
Can I ask, because there's 2 ways of taking that question. Are you talking about covering Web3 as a journalist, Or are you talking about Web3 technologies and how it'll impact journalism?
We're going to talk about, first of all, how are you going to cover the Web3, right?
So our panelists at the panel here at the World News Congress, Josh Quittner, made a very good point. And he said that you could choose really two different angles to take. You could start as business journalism and covering Web3, or you can start as technology. There is no right way, there is no wrong way. And the reason is because Web3 is really an intersection of economics and technology. It is a technology that actually is fundamentally changing first the economics of the digital world, and then will change the behaviors, the content, the distribution, and frankly speaking, all of our lives in the digital world. And so for young journalists that are interested in this, my first recommendation is get involved. This is such a significant paradigm and philosophy shift in the way that the internet operates and the way that communities actually engage with one another, that if you're not involved in it, it's very, very hard to cover it. So just like in financial journalism, if you are not immersed in finance, it's very, very hard to know where the stories are and what the truth is. It's the same way in Web3. If you're a journalist that wants to cover Web3, start by getting involved. Join these communities, figure out how they engage with one another and what they talk about and why they care, and then you'll be able to understand where their stories are. I would say choose your beat. Choose whether or not you're going to cover it as business or technology. It is slightly different. Again, there is no right or wrong, but choose one of those two directions. Both of them will get you stories that are going to impact the world and impact your audience, but choose a specialty there. So those were the two recommendations I would make for young journalists that really want to cover this.
As you have made your presentation about Gen Z, you are expecting that this kind of people that is going to constitute about 20% of the whole population very soon, is going to have a tremendous impact. Who is very recipient of this Web3, the whole industry? And are you suggesting that, for instance, if the news organization would not adopt to this new trend, that it's going to decline or perish in the future, in that sense?
That's a very direct way of putting it. And yes, that's exactly what I'm suggesting. I believe that Web3, blockchain-based internet, is not a solution looking for a problem. And there are a lot of new technologies that are solutions that are looking for a problem. But I actually believe that Web3 is a technology that is already solving problems that Gen Z are meeting today in the digital world. Because, like I mentioned in the presentation, this next generation, their behaviors on the internet today are already vastly different than the generations before them. Millennials, which I belong to, or Gen X or Gen Y, our behaviors on the internet and behaviors in community in general are completely different than Gen Z and their expectations. They expect to exist primarily in a digital world. They expect that the digital identities are the most important identities for them. They expect to own things in the digital world that have real value, and those things are going to be more meaningful to them than physical goods that you and I buy. At the end of the day, they actually expect to be able to engage in the brands, with the brands, and the channels that are most important to them in the same digital world with their digital identities and with their digital assets. Today, news organizations are not in that version of the digital world at all. We're in a arguably old digital world, which is what we know as the internet, of Web 2.0. But that next generation increasingly is not there. In just the same way as 15 years ago, news organizations had to learn how to get on the internet, we now need to learn how to move into Web 3. So that is what I'm suggesting. If we don't understand that generation and their behavior, if we don't understand the technology that they've decided to adopt, then we are once again going to miss the boat, and in another 5 years, we're going to be at this conference in 5 years and wonder what happened.
Let me ask about the Gen Z. Do you think they have a more generalized character, or do you think in somehow they're divided by culture, they're divided by area, or even divided by countries? I mean, for instance, the Chinese Gen Z, are they going to be different from the Western Gen Z?
Okay. Mainland China has to always be discussed separately. Because the decentralized internet that is being built in mainland China is different than the decentralized internet from the rest of the world.
Right.
Now, there is one. There is a very large decentralized internet, or I should say blockchain-based internet, that is being developed in China with an incredible layer of applications that is already built. But that is separate. So yes, if there is one separation, is mainland Chinese and the way that they're in that next generation, the way they engage with one another on a blockchain-based internet might end up being different than the rest of the world.
And it's also because they have such a huge population and market.
I think it's part of it, but it's primarily that the technology itself is segregated. It's separate.
Okay.
But for the rest of the world, I actually think that the Gen Z, this generation, and the surveys and studies back me up on this, are the most connected and therefore the most universal generation ever. Gen Z have decided that they're going to congregate in communities based on interests groups rather than based on race or nationality. And so you can have people from all over the world who have the same interests in the same digital community now in Web3. And that's how they've self-organized. And so I actually do think that the patterns we see with Gen Z in the United States are going to be very similar to the patterns that we see in Asia, whether it is in Taiwan or Singapore or Hong Kong or Philippines. It's going to be different. It's going to be similar. Right? Now, of course, the local cultures, and especially the local socioeconomic stratus, will also augment some of that behavior. So it's not going to be exactly the same. But I do think the trends that we see around the world are going to be similar.
You also discuss about there seems to be a dependent structure. For instance, the game player in Philippines, they try to generate a digital asset which can be bought from rich countries. And would that be a similar kind of thing will happen, or is it through the digital harmonization it will even out in the future?
The vision is that it will even out.
Okay.
Because the vision is a decentralized economy that's powered by blockchain and crypto will give the same economic opportunity to somebody living in a developing country in a very, very rural village as it does to somebody in a tier 1 city in a fully developed nation. That is the goal, and that is the promise of the decentralized economy.
It seems to be a very utopian idea.
It is very utopian, and I will admit it's nowhere close to that right now. I want to be very careful because I did not intend to suggest that there was this, actually the factory floor in the Philippines where a bunch of Filipino kids are generating value in Web3, selling it to rich Americans in the United States, right? That's not what I wanted to suggest. But there definitely is that bifurcation where there are people who are creating the value and then the people who are aggregating the value. That's a very clear separation. It might be other people in the Philippines buying those assets from other Filipinos, but there is a very clear delineation. We hope that with the empowerment that comes with the decentralized economy, over time, it will start to even out.
In the later part, there were discussion about generated AI.
Yes.
And this is a hot topic throughout the whole conference. You seem to suggest that there's a difference among the news organization, especially the Global South.
Yes.
And the big big news organizations. They have a different approach to generated AI. Is it true?
Well, actually, I'll summarize what the panel suggested.
Okay.
The panel suggested, I guess, two different spectrums. The first spectrum is between the Global South and then the truly developed nations. And the panel suggested the separation was that in the emerged markets, there is choice on whether or not to adopt free tools for the sake of journalism. Whereas in emerging markets, there is no choice. The free tools are there, and journalists in emerging markets will use them because it makes their journalism faster, it makes it hopefully more accurate, it makes it more productive, and they have to do it. Whereas in other places, like for instance the Financial Times in London, can decide we don't want to use those free tools, we don't want to rely on that, we're still going to pay a very, very large army of journalists to do journalism the way it's been done for the last 100 years.
Right.
Okay? So there's that bifurcation. The second suggestion of the panel was that even in the developed nations, in tier 1 cities around the world, there is a spectrum of Financial Times who believe that generative AI should not be used for creation of news, and Bloomberg on the other side, who is also a news organization that obviously has the same journalistic ethics, but they believe that if we are transparent about it, generative AI can be used to power journalism and power human journalists to be faster and more accurate and more effective as well. And so I don't know where this is going to land. I think that those two news organizations have taken a very public stance, and there are many, many other news organizations that have not yet, but everyone's exploring, everyone is learning, and at some point people will have to make a choice. Do I use these tools that could actually make our news organization more productive and therefore maybe eventually more profitable? Or do I take the Financial Times stance and say journalism should be done by humans, we are not going to allow AI to be part of the process? I don't know where people land.
Okay, finally, bear with me, the immutability of the blockchain.
Yes.
I mean, this is a very difficult concept for a lot of people.
Yes.
Could you explain for us what it really means and what kind of implication would that be doing?
Okay. So I'll try and really simplify it, and I need that because I also sometimes don't understand. If we have one computer that we own, like my laptop, I can write whatever I want on my laptop, I can change it, I can delete it. Because I own this computer, I am the single authority of what is inside of this computer, right? What the blockchain actually is it's a network of computers that does not have single owners. And the network of computers has to all agree on what is in it, what is in this network, in this computing environment. What is written, whether or not it can be changed, right? An entire network of computers needs to agree. That's what the blockchain at its simplest form is. And because there's so many different computers in this network that are owned by so many different people, there is no way for any single authority to take over the network and decide for everyone else. That's the goal of the blockchain. Decentralize that power to the point where no single individual or company can decide what is recorded and what is changed. As such, the blockchain creates immutability on the internet, which means once I record something to the blockchain, you actually need 51% of computing power on the blockchain, 51% of all the computers on the network to all agree to change or delete it, and that's just never going to happen. So once I record it as truth, it remains as truth. The reason it was designed this way was so that there could be a universal global ledger, a record of things that no one can go and manipulate. That was the original goal. This is extremely important for a decentralized economy because we need a ledger to say who owns what assets, who has how much money effectively in the network, without the fear of a single person taking over the network and then taking all of the power and therefore all of the value. Right? So that's what the blockchain is. That's why it creates what we call immutability.
And the implication of this?
The implication of this is that, well, for the first time, we really do have permanence of the internet. We can put something out into the digital world and expect that it will always be there. The second implication is now we can have an economy that is not centralized, that is not controlled by centralized power. And that centralized power can be single companies, single individuals, or single governments. Now it's controlled by the community. And then that creates very, very different types of engagement and relationship between individuals all around the world. And this is why it's created borderless economies, borderless communities that have to come together and have to actually individually vote on what is right, what is wrong, and what is next.
Okay, that triggered my interest. I'll have to learn more about this.
Please do.
Thank you very much, Gary.
Thank you so much for
your
having
time.
me.
谢谢各位的收看，我们下次见。 Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions.
And hope to see you again.